Australian Wildlife Conservancy has a long presence working in the Kimberley region in the northwest of WA. It's one of the most important landscapes for conservation in Australia, home to a host of threatened species, some found nowhere else. It's dominated by rocky terrain and complex escarpments, ranges and gorges, which have helped to protect some of the native species here, which have vanished from other parts of Northern Australia. The Kimberley is where a lot of foundational AWC research about conservation in the north was conducted, and where, importantly, that research has then been applied in the design of our large-scale land management programs, focusing in particular on the interactions of fire, feral herbivores, and cats. Over the past 2 decades, AWC's presence has expanded through a series of vast partnerships with government and with First Nations groups. And since 2016, under a partnership with the Department of Defence, AWC has been working across Yampi Sound training area, which spans 500,000 hectares of the Yampi Peninsula north of the town of Derby. This is a property with a 700-kilometre coastline, an incredible, spectacular part of the world. The following year, in 2017, AWC started working with traditional owners across the remainder of Dambimangari country, which extends a further 100 kilometres or so up the coast. The coastline of that part of the Kimberley extends for over 1,500 kilometres. So it's an incredible place to work. My guest today is Operations Manager Braden Riles. Braden is AWC's manager for Yampi and the Dambimangari Partnership, which means he has oversight of an area covering more than 1.3 million hectares. Braden studied conservation biology at the University of Wollongong. He completed an internship with AWC in 2019, and he hasn't left the Kimberley since. Last year, Braden also took part in an international program to cultivate emerging leaders in effective conservation, travelling to Gonareju National Park in Zimbabwe for 2 weeks as part of that program. So we have a lot to talk about, and let's get stuck into it. Braden, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Joey. It's a privilege to come on for a yarn.
And you're speaking to us today from Yampi. You're actually on the ground there. Can you describe to us where you are and what it's like in the Kimberley at this time of year?
Yeah, I'm at the operations base at Kimberley, which is where we stage from for Yampi. But firstly, I'd probably just apologise for all the sounds going on in the background at the moment. We've got some burning happening, which has just started about 5 minutes ago. There's a fire truck about to drive past, and there's probably going to be a helicopter come in at any moment. And none of this is scripted, so sorry about that if you can hear all that stuff. But yeah, no, it's beautiful at the moment here. We're just coming out of the wet season, and we're moving into the dry season now, which the Dambimangari people call Drooly. The nights are starting to get pretty cool here, and the days are just perfect blue skies, southeasterly winds. Yeah, and it's when we get really busy.
So a lot going on. And like you said, dry season is when a lot of the field programs kick off. What about the wet season? How have the last few months been? And how did that compare to the previous wet season where we had all that, massive flooding in the Kimberley?
Yeah, it was quite a contrast, actually. For this part of the Kimberley, it was extremely low. I know around Derby and extending north of Derby, it's been well below average. I think we had about 400 mil here at Kimbolton, where we would normally expect well over 1,000. So things, as a result of that, things are starting to dry up really quickly in comparison to previous years, which the previous 3 wet seasons have been well above average. And at this time of year, we'd expect creeks and rivers still to be charging along and grass to be really green and yeah, a bit more life in the country, but that's the way it goes.
And I assume that has implications for the work that you're doing at the moment, especially with fire. We'll come to that in a moment. Can you tell us about some of the wildlife that's around you there at the operations base and what the landscape is like?
Yeah, for sure. So Kimbolton is it's nestled in among some quartzite ranges on Western Yampi here, and it sits in this little valley. We're only 10 to 15 kilometers from the coast, so we get a bit of that influence. But in here, there's a number of fruiting trees and some sort of typical species that sit below the quartzite range as well. Out the back, I've got a miniata, a big eucalypt. There's some other corymbias and things like that, some bloodwoods. Yeah, it's amazing habitat for threatened species. So where we are, we've got golden-backed tree rats, Kimberley brush-tailed baskergales. This morning I was walking over to the office to start the day, and western partridge pigeons just burst out of the grass, which are another threatened species. It's amazing, yeah.
Gouldian finches, another species which AWC has worked with a lot, and looking into the importance of fire management in protecting that species. What's the sort of dawn chorus around you when you wake up there?
Well, the first thing is the blue-winged kookaburras before the sun even comes up. So you're usually awake before the sun, which is great. To always get to see that. And then, yeah, the pardalotes will kick in. The finches will come in. Yeah, obviously the partridge pigeons are always sort of meandering around. Lots of honey eaters, especially when the miniatas start to flower at the moment out the back. It's a symphony.
Braden, you worked as an ecologist with AWC for several years after your internship. What is it about the biodiversity of the Kimberley that you love the most, or any particular group of animals that you're super passionate about, or is it the mix of everything?
I think it's largely a mix of everything. I do have a particular affinity for reptiles, and the Kimberley is such an amazing cradle of biodiversity for reptiles and mammals and birds and everything. But yeah, of course, it's the Kimberley is this giant ancient refuge that essentially is held onto these species and created new ones over deep time. And reptiles are really a really good study group for that as well. So there's lots going on. If I had to pick a favorite, they haven't been detected on Yampi yet, but I'm sure they're here and we will find them over time. Are rough-scaled pythons.
Yeah, they're a very special python that we've detected a few times, haven't we, on Charnley River and Artesian Range, and also Dambimangari country to the north. So yeah. Now, moving from ecology and science into more of a land management and operations role, what was that transition like for you?
It was a lot of fun. I feel like it was a natural progression. And it's just, like doing the things that I really love, like turning ecological information into practical outcomes. It's just, I think that ecological information, which we do really well at AWC, is really important to practicalize. And I think at an individual level, that's really important as well. So it was one of my passions. It's just everyday observations, turning them into something that's feasible for the country. It's hard to beat.
And so now you've got this role that encompasses land management across Yampi as well as the Dambimangari partnership area, well over 1 million hectares. It's massive. It's a huge landscape. Can you give us a bit of a rundown on those two properties and how they vary topographically, and sort of how similar they are in some ways, but how different they are in other ways?
Yeah, for sure. I think some of their major differences are sort of underpinned by the major geology that's represented. Yampi in the south, you can see there from east to west, encompasses significant tracts of granite, kind of like really complex granite country, and sort of mountainous inselbergs all the way through the lowlands, through the flats, which is amazing alluvial savanna country, and then right through to the western side there where you can see Yalloon and Kimbolton, which is where I am now. That's largely quartzite, and there's a plethora of things in between which make the country so complex. But Yampi generally, as you can see there through the middle section, is largely lowland savanna. Whereas if you move north, further up onto Dambimangari country, north of the Walcott there, it becomes almost like a fortress of sandstone. And that's where the refuge, that deep time refuge, really comes into play, where threats don't move through the landscape in the same way that they do down in the lowlands. And for that reason, fire behaves differently. Feral animals find it very difficult to work their way in there. Cats hunt less effectively in that sort of country. And of course, there's, because of the complexity and the plethora of different refugial pockets across it, the species assemblages are quite different.
I love that sandstone fortress, which is, I guess Dambimangari country is similar to what we've talked about previously at Artesian Range, that real topographic refuge because of the complexity of the landscape, and so many species there which have disappeared from other parts of Northern Australia but clung on in those complex parts of the Kimberley. But it sounds like Yampi is quite different, with a lot of that open lowlands and flatter country.
Yeah, Yampi's sort of the intersection of three separate bioregions as well. So it's really amazing. Yeah, I mean, here at Kimbolton, you get sort of Pindan country almost coming right up into it, which is part of the Dampier Lands bioregion. And you got Central Kimberley and North Kimberley sort of mixing in as well, which helps to explain the species assemblages and why there's still so many threatened species here. Yeah.
Both Yampi and Dambimangari are partnership projects for AWC, but it's all part of the Dambimangari traditional owner area. How do you work with Dambimangari Rangers across both sites to deliver your field programs?
I think, as you say, it's all Dambimangari country, which is the traditional land of Water people. And they have a really strong and complex responsibility to look after country. And they've articulated that really well for us in their Healthy Country Plan. So a lot of the activities and the way we engage with them on a daily basis is as a result of their responsibility to look after country. So we can provide some technical expertise on a daily basis. We're working with the rangers in like a very organic sort of space, and then at the level of what they're trying to achieve on their country, particularly for the Dambimangari partnership area. We'll sit down in the boardroom and go through those things as part of their Healthy Country Advisory Committee. That's that photo there is some burn planning that we typically do at the end of the year. We all sit down and review how things went, what the results were, what we can do better next year for everyone, and then we'll reiterate that as we go.
And fire management is one of the major priorities, both in the Healthy Country Plan and in what AWC's objectives are being part of this partnership. And because it is the early dry season, you're in the middle of that prescribed burning right now. Can you talk us through what you're trying to achieve with the burning that is carried out at this time of year?
Yeah, so we're burning for biodiversity primarily, of course, which takes form in a number of different ways. Generally, and on the larger scale, we're doing an aerial prescribed burn program. And for that 1.3 million hectare area that is Dambimangari country, we're probably about 50% of the way through the aerial burn program at the moment. And what we're doing mostly, and again, it sort of varies between Yampi and partnership area because of the way the country is there, but we're breaking up and essentially introducing a mosaic of fuel ages, while with the co-benefit of preventing wildfire from moving through the landscape, from burning out specific areas, from priority zones, ecological and cultural priority zones, and generally creating a bit more biodiversity with the benefit of a healthier country. It's hard to explain in such a short period of time because there's a lot to it. But that's a good photo that shows how the aerial program works. We burn in this network pattern, I guess, which you can see there. We've flown 2 separate lines, and you can see the smoke coming up from where those incendiaries have landed in the grass in the savannah, and are starting to take across the landscape. In an ideal world, those lines will then self-extinguish overnight, and you'll be left with this sort of, if it's done well, it's almost a beautiful, intricate pattern of fire scars across the landscape, and that helps us with the mosaic we're after. Yeah.
So a lot of the large-scale burning work from the helicopter. Can you talk a little about how capacity has been built among the Dambimangari Ranger group to actually deliver a lot of this program?
Yeah, for sure. So they started their fire program up with the help of KLC back in 2010, I think it was. And the Rangers started obviously getting back out on country and burning a lot more than in the previous few decades, which is amazing. And that almost immediately in the first 3 years, there was huge results that came of that in terms of reintroducing that mosaic and creating a more fire inimical landscape. And since we've taken on the partnership, we've been able to help provide a little bit more technical expertise around the use of the incendiary machines, navigation, using, more modern devices, like even with your iPads and all the new apps and things that you can use. Planning with GIS is a big part of it as well. We're always incorporating the Rangers are a pivotal part. Sorry, it's so noisy here at the moment. The Rangers are a pivotal part of the planning process, so they get to see the full suite of looking at the satellite imagery, planning the lines on the maps, getting all the gear ready, getting in the helicopter, going out, flying the lines, bringing them back, downloading the data at the end of the day. So I think, that's a big aspect of capacity building, is sort of, in the future, we can step away and the Rangers can just take control for their part of the country. But, yeah.
I thought we could just briefly share the hotspot map. So this is a satellite generated map for the part of the country that you're in right now. And you can actually see on it some of the areas that you've been burning as part of the prescribed burning program, and also the hotspots that are active at the moment. Can you just briefly run us through sort of where the program is up to for this year and what the remaining priorities are for burning? Yeah.
I'll speak specific because the burn program goes right across the Kimberley, but I'll speak specifically for this area. Yes, see that sort of those green areas, they're early dry season scars that we put in the last couple of weeks and months, and I would think that we're probably 80% of the way to finishing what we all had planned for the year up there. There's a little bit of work to do in the coming weeks as we just touch up sort of areas of younger fuel, parts of the country that wouldn't take earlier because there was high soil moisture or more complex topography, things like that. So still a bit of work to do up there. And then you can see below the Walcott on Yampi, we haven't really started much at all. There's one fire still actively going there, which was lit a couple of days ago, and it's been backing against the wind through some complex sandstone just south of the Walcott Inlet there. And then, as you keep coming south, there's no scars on Yampi yet. And that's because we're starting there today. And that's why that helicopter came in just now.
So we could keep watching actually over the next couple of weeks on the NAFI website to see your progress. There's not a lot of jobs where you can go out, do a big day's work, and then track the progress from satellite. That's the sort of impact that you're having. So encourage everyone to have a look on firenorth.org.au and follow Braden's work. We can assess how the burning's going, Braden, from there.
It's such an awesome tool. I think we all rely on it. If you ask anyone in the AWC office in Broome at the moment, they've probably all got a NAFI tab open there.
I'd like to briefly touch on feral herbivores across both areas. So there are some feral herbivores, even though this is such a biodiverse, rich part of the country. What are the major impacts of those feral herbivores? And are there sort of areas where they're at high densities and low densities?
Yeah, yeah, there are. I think, yeah, firstly, they are recognised as one of the key threatening processes for much of the biodiversity up here, and they have an impact on so many different native species. The more you researched it, the more scary it would be, I would think. They have immediate short-term impacts on small mammals such as Rattus tunnii and Pseudobes nanus and things like that. Just through changing the complexity of the grasslands, removing habitat, removing food availability, and shelter for predation from cats and things like that. But over the long term, they're compacting soil structure. They're altering the fire program, which we're trying to do as well. It's really hard if they're there. They're doing all sorts of things. They're degrading riparian systems, which in the Kimberley and indeed across Northern Australia are so extremely important as sort of wet refuge areas for small mammals, for birds and for reptiles. So their impact is quite significant, and it's very widespread, probably more widespread than people realise.
And so in terms of control across both parts of or both of the separate partnership projects, what are the objectives of the feral herbivore control program, and how's it looking? Like, have we been able to lower the density of feral herbivores across those sites?
Yeah, I'll start with the partnership area to the north, because, like I said, that is a sort of a fortress that it stops the movement of feral herbivores. Unfortunately, donkeys are quite good at traversing a lot of that country, so there are some small populations in there that we've recently been trying to manage. And last year we had a first run of them, which we'd only recently detected them as well because the partnership's obviously still in a bit of an inventory phase up there with all the ecological monitoring. And so we detected the donkeys there, and they're in areas where there's really high densities of threatened species as well. So yeah, we got into that and we removed 110 donkeys from one little catchment area, and we'll follow up that work this year. And I suspect that's a pretty high knockdown rate for that area. And largely donkeys are in pretty low density in the rest of the Kimberley because other agencies are also working to remove them. So in Dumby country, it's generally just keeping them out, watching for areas where there might be a few incursions, and managing them generally through aerial shooting programs. And then as we move south again onto Yampi, it's a different story because we have a much more simple landscape. Like I was saying, it's far more suitable, particularly for scrubbers, for wild cattle in there, and for decades and decades they've gone unmanaged across much of that area. So we have been in a bit of a knockdown phase for the last, since we took on the contract really, and we've removed from Yampi, I think, close to 5,500, 6,000 scrubbers. Again, that's through generally mustering programs, and once the density's sort of knocked down and you've mustered as much as you can, then you come in with the aerial shooting program, and that's pretty much most of our effort now. Our rate of effort is aerial shooting. We're at a point where mustering is largely non-viable.
Just sharing some video of the landscape. They're very challenging country to muster through, especially at the scale that we're talking about. So can appreciate the different approaches needed. Braden, we're almost running out of time, but I did want to talk a little about the Effective Conservation Training Initiative, which you were part of last year in 2023. It was organised through an international group of various conservation NGOs who invited emerging leaders in conservation to come and really engage with what effective conservation looks like and how leadership techniques can be applied in different sort of conservation contexts. It sounds incredible. Can you tell us about that program and what your involvement was like?
Yeah, it was incredible. And a real privilege to be a part of. I think, yeah, like you said, they're sort of between all the organisations that contributed across the globe. There was a recognised need for future leaders to step up, and particularly in such complex environments, and the places we're working in right around the globe, having conversations with people in Africa or South America about what they're dealing with. It's somewhat similar, like as a leader, you sort of, sometimes you have to be an ecologist. Sometimes you have to be a remote medical doctor. You have to be an anthropologist. Like, there's all these different things that you have to take into consideration, just because, it's what we're trying to achieve is so out there at times. But yeah, so it was amazing being part of that program. Going to Zimbabwe and meeting, there was 18 other trainees, all amazing participants with great stories from around the world, and engaging in some deep experiential learning is probably the word. Yeah, by sitting around, and there was a good photo there of the sort of classroom scenario that we're in. We're sitting around a boab, and it's all hands-on, yeah, sort of organic learning, and it was brilliant.
And working with some of these organizations like African Parks, Rewilding Argentina, that do translocations with elephants or anteaters, like really quite different programs to what AWC does. But like you said, it's sort of focusing on the people skills of conservation. And there's a great quote from Pippa, an AWC ecologist, who said, "Wherever you are in the world, conservation is all about people." And I think that's one of the things that this program has helped focus on. I'll direct people to read more about that. There's a lot more we could talk about with that program, but there's a great feature on that in our upcoming Wildlife Matters magazine, which will be out shortly. Braden, thanks so much for joining us today and taking the opportunity to talk through the partnerships of Yampi and Dambimangari in the Kimberley, and about your time on that Effective Conservation Training Initiative program. Good luck with the burning over the next few weeks.
Thanks, Joey. Appreciate it, mate. Yeah.
And thanks to everyone who joined us today. As I said, you can read more about that work in our new edition of Wildlife Matters, which will be out very, very soon. If you've been inspired by this conversation and the work AWC is doing, please consider supporting it by making a donation at australianwildlife.org, or you can get in touch by giving us a call or sending an email. We'll have another webinar out soon, so stay tuned for the invite to that. Thanks again. See you next time.